Gentlemen, what is going on today? My name is Ryan Mickler. I'm the host and the founder of the Order of Man podcast and movement. Welcome here and welcome back. Podcast and movement. Welcome here and welcome back. I'm going to talk with you about something today that I just don't normally talk about. I got a lot of requests over the past several years for me to talk more about being a father of girls and young women. So that's going to be something I'm going to attempt to do today. Now, admittedly, I talk more about my boys. I've got 3 boys and I've got 1 daughter. Obviously, I talk more about my boys because that's what I know. That's what I'm comfortable with. And also, admittedly, I'm a bit more protective than my daughter than I am of my boys. I think that could probably be true and said of just about any father worth his weight out there. So I'm going to share with you today 5 strategies that have helped me. These are mindsets. These are things to be thinking about when it comes to raising your young ladies. We're going to get into that in just a minute. Before I do, 2 things, guys. We're really trying to build out our email list right now and communicate with you guys via that medium. Social media keeps jerking us around. I was temporarily suspended from Twitter for something that really wasn't that controversial. You guys can go check it out and see what it was. And you know, I don't like to complain about being shadow banned and being limited in our reach on Instagram and Facebook and all these things, but it is the reality. And so instead of just moping around and complaining about it and making a bigger deal than it is, what I want to do is make sure that we're building out a diverse way to communicate with you should one of those platforms get shut off. And that way we can still keep in touch with you. So head to orderofman.com, check out the newsletter. We're going to be offering special discounts, insights I don't share anywhere else. You're going to be the first to know about events and new products and other things that we have going on. So orderofman.com, check it out. And also, if you would, make sure you leave a rating and review for the podcast, because believe it or not, it may not seem like it. You may think it's not that big a deal, but that's a great way for you to support what we're doing here and to help widen out the visibility and the reach with a podcast. So check out the email, orderofman.com. We send that out every Wednesday morning. And then also make sure to leave that rating and review. All right, guys, let's talk about how to father our daughters. Obviously, this is a crucial thing. Many of you fathers, probably half, I don't know the statistics, have a daughter or daughters. And I know I don't talk about it a lot, but it's crucial that we as men know how to raise our daughters effectively in a degenerate culture, frankly. There's a lot of risk to our daughters. There's a lot of things they need to be aware of. There's a lot of things that we can do. There's a lot of innocence and maybe even a bit of naiveness. I tread lightly on saying that. I don't think women are naive necessarily, but I do believe that because they are the fairer sex, they tend to think better of situations. They tend to more, I think so, than men put themselves in potentially compromising situations. So our daughters are going to deal with that. That's the reality of the situation. And for my daughter, I want to make sure that she's equipped with everything that she needs to be able to thrive and win and be independent, and hopefully at some point and at some stage in her life, partner with a man and have kids and live the life that she has a desire to live. So the first thing I wanted to share with you is, number 1, we have to exemplify what manliness is, because our daughters primarily are going to look to us as an example of who they want to be with. And I often have said that boys, our sons, want to be us. Our daughters look for who to be with based on our performance and based on the way we're showing up. Now, yes, your daughters do want to be like you. If you're into fishing and you're into hunting and you're into painting and you're into photography and you're into entrepreneurship, yes, of course, she's going to be like that too. But primarily, they're going to be looking at you as an example when they find a young boy, a young man that they're attracted to, and you become the benchmark, the standard by which she measures every one of those guys. And that bar should be set extremely, extremely high. Now, a lot of the times when I talk about exemplifying manliness, sometimes people mistake that for just believing that you can just be a good example. It's just not enough. It really isn't. You need to be able to connect the dots. So when you're showing up and you're holding a door for a woman, or you're pulling out the chair, or you're standing up when she leaves the table or comes to the table, or the way that you communicate with your wife, or the way that you treat women in general, you also have to fill in the dots and fill in the blanks and let her know why you're doing that thing and why we give women the respect that we do. This is very, very important. If you just hope that you're going to be a good example, that's going to go a long ways, but you need to make sure you're having these conversations about how a man is supposed to treat a woman, how you treat women, and how you expect other men, those who will come into your daughter's life, how she should expect them to treat her. So guys, if we're not exemplifying manliness, none of what I'm going to share with you today really matters, because although it will rub off and it will help, there's going to be a huge gap between the way that your daughter or daughters see men and the way that ideally we should be behaving around the women in our lives. And you want to make sure, as I stated in last week's Friday Field Notes, that the integrity gap between the way that you want her to be treated and the way you're actually showing up is minimal, if not non-existent. Now, I say exemplify manliness because it's important that we use the term manliness as opposed to masculinity. Now, this might be semantics. I don't want to get tripped up on that. Everybody here is capable of discernment and understanding the nuance of what I'm talking about. But I believe that there is a difference between masculinity and manliness. Masculinity is simply, and even if you look this up, simply the characteristics, virtues, behaviors, patterns, etc., that men ascribe to or men exhibit based on their biological makeup. Now, it's not toxic to be masculine. It's not even virtuous. It just is. And the way that we harness our masculine traits is and will determine whether or not we're acting manly. So, for example, if I'm walking down the street and I see an attractive young woman by herself and I don't see anybody else around, well, I think it's safe to say that all of us understand that masculinity and men generally have a greater propensity for violence. That isn't a secret. That isn't guesswork. It's the reality of the situation. So if I see this young woman walking down the street and I decide to physically or sexually assault her or attempt to steal her purse, and I do so in a violent manner, I think all of us would say that's not a proper use of masculinity. On the other hand, if I see somebody doing that to her and I decide to use my propensity for violence, dominance, protection, courage, strength to subdue somebody who might be doing that to her, or even to put a bullet between the eyes of that individual, that's still violence, but it's righteous violence, and it's harnessing my masculine characteristics for productive outcomes. So it's not enough just to be masculine. We have to be manly. Again, let's not get tripped up in the semantics, but understand the distinction, however you want to look at it. And let's all, I think, agree that we can either use our characteristics and behaviors for horrible, horrific outcomes, or we can use them for productive, virtuous, honorable outcomes. And we need to be acting manly, as in men, not boys. All right. Number two, it's crucial that you also, if you're going to exhibit manliness and teach her about those things, then it's crucial that you also surround her with feminine women. You need both. You can't have a daughter who's so masculine because she was never introduced to a female presence. And you also, I think, have to be very aware in our modern times that she actually is being introduced to femininity. And when I say that, I'm talking about lovely, kind, beautiful, compassionate, empathetic, understanding, nurturing, all of the characteristics and behaviors that we would naturally ascribe to women. Now, there's a lot of women out there who, and I think this is becoming increasingly the case, who don't exhibit those behaviors, or who have been told that if you do, then you're somehow inferior to men, and that you actually have to go out into the workforce and you have to go out and produce and do all of the things that men do in order to be equal. Well, ladies, you don't have to do that. Now, if you want to, and I know some very, very successful women out into the workforce, and if that's a desire that you have, then so be it. But also, let's not strip away the beautiful nature of womanhood on the altar of just trying to be like men. we're different. We're not equal. Men and women are not equal. Let's get over that right now. Equal means the same. We're not. Now we're equal in worth, human potential, human worth. I talked about that on the Asking Anything on Wednesday. But we're different. Our characteristics, our behaviors, our beliefs, our thought patterns, our gut instincts, the way we respond to situations generally is different than one another. And I want to make sure that my daughter is getting an introduction into how men show up for their people. And I also want to ensure that she gets an introduction into how women can be lovely and go out and be in their feminine selves, in their feminine way. That's very, very important for me. Now, we don't have to sacrifice one or the other. I don't have to turn her into a tomboy, and I don't have to turn her into some sort of a pushover or this woman who's not capable of doing anything. Okay, there's a balancing act here. And what that means is not that we find the middle ground, but that we find both sides of the equation and we introduce those sides of the equation as appropriate. And that's why I believe that every young woman and every young man, as a son or a daughter, deserves and should have the right to a loving and engaged mother and father in the home. I know that isn't always the case. I know the family court systems mess with this. I know that pop culture tends to deliberately destroy and dismantle the nuclear family, but that's the battle that we must fight. And our daughters and our sons, by the way, need to be in the presence of masculine men and feminine women. And then we also need to make sure that we're honoring that femininity. When my wife and I are parenting in a specific moment, there might be situations where I have to be stern or disciplinary or tough. And there's other situations that require some tenderness and some love and some empathy and compassion. Well, who do you think takes the lead on each of those scenarios? That's not to say I'm not capable of tenderness, and it's not to say she's not capable of being a disciplinary. But I need to be able to honor when I see a woman, for the example of our family, is I need to be able to honor my wife when she's being feminine with my daughter, and I don't need to question it. I don't need to say it's stupid, and I don't need to say whatever it is I maybe have the inclination to say, but I just need to honor it and encourage it and embrace the fact that a daughter has a good feminine presence in her life that I don't fully understand. And I don't need to fully understand it, because if I did, there would be no use for having women around, and vice versa. If women understood men, there'd be no need for you to have that male presence in your life. This is why we have both. So that's number 2, surround her with feminine women. Number 3 is, obviously we want to teach our daughters all sorts of things. I'm going to get into that, but there is a couple of things here that I wanted to pull out that I think are very important. It's crucial. It's imperative that you teach her these 2 things: self-defense, some form of martial arts, and situational awareness. There's an infinite number of things that she needs to learn, but if you're not doing these things for your daughter, I think you're dropping the ball. And I hate to say that we live in a society where the risk to her is probably, if I was to look at the statistics, more men are victims of violent crime, probably because of the scenarios they put themselves in. But I think a woman is, generally speaking, more vulnerable to those attacks and those situations than a man is. We can debate and we can discuss that, but I heard a great conversation on it, and I think it was with Jocko, and he said something to the effect, and I'm paraphrasing, so don't quote me on this or him, that sometimes a man has what another man wants, right? If I've got my wallet and I've got $2,000 or $3,000 in there in my credit card, there's going to be somebody else who might want that. If I'm driving around a high-priced, luxury car, I have a luxury watch on, I'm carrying something that somebody else might want. Now, that's not always going to be the case, especially with me. I drive an older pickup. I wear t-shirts and jeans. Like, I don't really look like somebody who might have a lot of money. So sometimes men have what other people want, but women, they always have what other men want. They do not get to absolve themselves of having what other men want. So you need to get your daughters enrolled in martial arts. I'm talking about jujitsu. I'm talking about wrestling. I'm talking about striking. Is this going to keep her out of all of these situations? Of course not. But you might as well give her a leg up. You might as well give her a fighting chance. I would also teach her how to use knives and always make sure that she has a knife on her. I would teach her how to use firearms and make sure she understands the firearm safety rules and make sure she knows how to utilize that thing in a very quick and proficient manner to neutralize a threat that she may come across. If there's a young woman walking down the street and myself separately walking down the street, the attacker is going to go after the woman. He's not going to go after me when he has the choice. So we need to make sure that our daughters are equipped to be able to handle that. I would also say situational awareness. Now, this goes back to what I was saying about women and their propensity to see the best in every situation. I think sometimes I'm speaking in broad generalities here, that based on my own personal observation, that more often than not, women tend to look through life or at life through rose-colored glasses more so than men do. So they see the best in people. They want to help. They want to be empathetic. And what they do is they open themselves up to risk and exposure and vulnerabilities when they do. It's good. It's a beautiful thing, but it needs to be addressed. So teaching your daughter situational awareness so that they're not putting themselves in compromising situations. They're not making poor decisions that will inevitably put them at a greater risk. So do you do exercises with your daughter when you're getting out of the vehicle or even getting back into the vehicle? If my wife's at the grocery store and she's got her head buried in the trunk of a car because she's putting the groceries away, but she's not watching behind her, okay, well, that's a problem, right? If she's walking down the road, especially late at night, or in a scarcely populated area, then she ought to be on alert, more ready, more prepared for that. And I think men generally are going to be more so that way just through our nature. So we need to ensure that our daughters are capable of seeing their surroundings and keeping themselves out of harm's way, because we won't always be around. So those are the 2 or 3 things that I wanted to extract specifically when it comes to skills. Again, it's martial arts and self-defense, and that could include knife work, that could include firearms, and of course, situational awareness. Now, the next thing, number 4, is that we want to help her be independent. I want to help my daughter be independent. I don't want her to have to rely on a man. I don't want her not to know how to change the oil on a car. I don't want her to have to know or rely on somebody pulling over on the side of the road because her car is broken down. I don't want to have her rely on other people to fix things when she should be fully capable of doing those things herself. She should know electrical. She should know plumbing. She should know basic vehicle maintenance. She should know how to change a tire. In addition to that, she should know how to make money. She should know how to balance a bank account. She should know how to do her schoolwork. She should know how to present in public. She should know how to communicate effectively. Like, these are all things that our daughters need, not more than our sons, but let's not overlook the fact that we don't live in the 1940s or the 1950s where our daughters are just going to be at home and they're going to be homemakers for the rest of their lives. Now, if that's the case, great. But I'll tell you what, my wife, as a homemaker, she's a stay-at-home mom. She's a homemaker. She's very, very independent. When I leave on a business trip, I'm the one who calls her. I barely hear from her because she's doing her thing. She's gardening and she's doing food preservation and she's taking the kids where they need to go and she's running the classroom and she can balance a checkbook and she can manage our finances to the degree that she needs to when I'm gone, because that's one of my responsibilities in the dynamic of our home. But guys, you want to make sure that she's completely independent, because the last thing I want from my daughter is A, to have to rely on a man, or B, to have to put herself in a situation that might be compromising, whether that's a potentially dangerous situation, or maybe even marrying a guy that she's not completely attracted to or isn't the one for her because she needs help with finances, for example. That's a ridiculous thing. That's not going to happen with my daughter. And I think you probably feel the same way. And if that's the case, then you can't just hide them and you can't just tuck them in the corner and hope they don't experience any of the real world, which honestly, I have the propensity to do at times. Like, I'm going to shelter her. I'm going to bubble wrap her. Guys, we got to introduce our daughters to the real world and help them develop the skills that will allow them to be independent. Now, the opposite side of that is we don't want her to be so independent. And this comes with the third wave feminist type movements. So independent where she's a man hater. I don't need a man. I don't need this. I don't need that. And I don't need a man to open my door. I can open myself. Like, yes, we know, all men know that women are capable of opening the door for themselves. That's not why we do it, because we think you're incapable. Or I was on a flight about a month ago, and a lady, I had opened the hatch on the plane to get my luggage out, and there was a smaller lady next to me. I know she was fully capable of putting the luggage in there. She did it by herself, but I grabbed it and I handed it to her, and she simply said, "Thank you," and smiled. And that was it. Like, we're not courteous and respectful because we don't think you're capable of doing it. We're just trying to honor and respect you as women. So we don't want man haters either. We want women who honor masculinity and manliness. And that comes back to point number one. So let's not say that just because we're trying to raise independent daughters that we want them to hate men, because we all know where that leads. And there's some very, very disgusting, just nasty, I would say, women who hate men and hate society and hate this quote unquote tyrannical patriarchy. And they don't even know what they're talking about. They've been so programmed and conditioned to hate something that's actually good. Men building, lifting, edifying, creating, innovating, that's good. And I'm not your enemy, ladies. And ladies, you aren't men's enemy. Now, there's situations where we are pitted against each other. It's unfortunate, but it's the reality. But generally speaking, we're not enemies. So independent daughters, but not man haters. And guys, the last thing I would say here is that you really need to ensure that your daughter knows that she is valuable and she has some contribution to the environment that she's in, whether that's the dynamic of your home or in business or in college and school, that there's something valuable about her above and beyond her body and her sexuality. I think I was introduced to this concept by Dr. Warren Farrell, who's coming back on the podcast next week. He wrote a book called The Boy Crisis. And it's been a while since I read the book, but he said the last thing that young women need is to believe that the only contribution and value they have in this world is their body and their sexuality. Because then they're going to rely on those practices, using their body to get what they want, or believing that if they don't have sex with somebody or they don't show them physical love, that they're not worth anything. I don't want my daughter to feel like that. So my daughter and I, we have a great relationship. We went to the lake yesterday. She showed me how she was swimming. We have a pool she swims in. We'll watch shows together. We'll talk and we'll laugh and we'll draw and we'll play and we'll wrestle and we'll do things. And obviously there's not a sexual component to it, but that's what's needed. There's too many young women in society that the only attention they ever get from men is sexual in some way. So what do? They put on skimpy clothes. They show off their boobs. They strive for sexual attention. The way they speak, the way they act, the way they talk, the things they do is all sexualized, because they never learn from a healthy male relationship what it's like to add value to the scenario without having to be sexual in nature. That's one of the greatest things that an engaged father can do for his daughter. You do that by complimenting her. You do that by giving her the tools, as I said earlier, to be independent, by honoring her efforts, by rewarding and encouraging her progress, and by just being there and present and playing and laughing and joking and wrestling and swimming and painting and all the things that you do with her outside of sexual interaction with a woman. It's crucial, guys. And as a father of a daughter, these are the things that I'm constantly working on. Now, admittedly, I'm not as dialed in on these things as I am with my boys, because it's easier to take my boys and say, hey, let's go to jujitsu. It's easier to take my boys and say, hey, we're going camping, we're going hunting. Why can't I do that stuff with my daughter? I can, and I do. and I should do that more. Let me recap, guys. Number one is we need to exemplify manliness, because she's going to look at us not only for behaviors and how she's going to show up, but she's also going to look for the attributes you possess in a future partner. Number two is help her be surrounded with feminine, lovely women. She's got to be around other feminine women, and you have to honor, encourage, and recognize that. Number three, teach her specifically, in addition to other things, but specifically self-defense, martial arts, knife work, firearms training, and situational awareness. Number four, help her to be independent, sovereign. Dare I say sovereign? Help her to be independent, but again, not a man hater. And number five is show her through your words and your actions that she has value to add separate from her body or sexuality. I hope that helps, guys. If you have other thoughts that I should add to the list, hit me up on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. Leave a comment. Make sure you share. Emails are going to be starting to go out. They already have over the past couple of weeks. So if you want to stay in the know about what we have going on event-wise, podcasts that are coming up, insights that I don't share anywhere else, go to orderaman.com. And the very last thing, especially if this podcast resonated with you today, or you know of a man, a father with a daughter or daughters, that you share this, take a screenshot, shoot them a text, send them an email, share it on Instagram or Facebook, and let's get the word out about what we can do as men specifically today to raise independent, beautiful, contributing, sovereign ladies. All right, you guys, that's all I've got for you. We'll be back next week. Until then, go out there, take action, father your daughters, and become the man you are meant to be.